You might call Bashar al-Assad the accidental president of Syria. Bashar trained in Britain to become an ophthalmologist, while his elder brother Basil was groomed to rule. But Basil died in a car accident. Their father went to the grave in 2000, and after a lavish state funeral, Bashar became Syria's new president. Many believed he would be a reformer, rolling back the repression of his father's regime. Even in Israel, politicians were suddenly hopeful. But Assad has largely continued the hardline stance of his father, supported by Iran. While he backs the Lebanese Hezbollah militia, he crushes dissent at home. So how can the accidental president pose as a reformer now?
Well, Ammar Abdulhamid is a Syrian democracy activist who escaped the country in 2005. He now lives in exile in the United States. Joins me now from Washington. Thanks for talking to us tonight. And I want to get your reaction, as I'm sure you have a reaction to this, when the comment comes from Bashar al-Assad, who says, "We are for reform. We are for meeting the people's demands." As somebody like yourself who's now living in the United States in exile, how do those words ring for you?
No, very hollow indeed. I mean, I've never really personally had any kind of hopes of reform from Bashar. He was selected to be president. The constitution was changed by the old guard within 45 minutes or less in order to make him president, to preserve the status quo. He was never empowered. That was not his vocation. This is not what he was there to do. And he lived up to the expectations of the old guard. He might have brought some new faces with him, and he ended up, in fact, having a power struggle with the old guard, but not over reform, simply over control, over who's going to run the show and how much power he is going to have. Well, he ended up emerging as a person in charge, but, you know, reform had nothing to do with this. Eventually, in fact, as he emerged in charge, he turned against his own support bases. The city of Daraa, for instance, in South Syria, and the city of Latakia in North Syria, the two cities that are now in open rebellion against the regime, of course, a peaceful rebellion on the part of the protesters, have traditionally been power bases for the Ba'ath regime that was established by Bashar's father. He neglected the base. He did not invest enough in the people. He turned his back on the grassroots. And as a result, of his corruption, his family's corruption, he even lost the support of his base, and his base continues to shrink. And after today's speech, I think his support basis right now is at an all-time low, and I envision that the protest will grow bigger and bigger in the days to come.
So if it's at an all-time low, if he hasn't followed through on the reform that he had hoped for, if he's having his former supporters are now turning their back on him, what's keeping him in power? Why hasn't he fallen yet?
Brute force. I mean, the reality is very much like in the case of Gaddafi, in the case of Saleh. There are certain internal balances in the country that he preys upon and uses to his advantage. He tries to use the sectarian divide, but even that is eroding now, as many members of his own minority sect, the Alawite sect, realize that he's a bad case for them, and they cannot simply bet on him being their champion and being the champion of Syria and Syrian reforms. That's gone, but now he is depending very much on armed units that he formed and cultivated over the last 10 years, and that owe loyalty to him. I mean, they depend for their livelihood on him. They are basically internal mercenaries, you can say, and they will be willing to kill, and they did kill for him in Daraa and Latakia, and unfortunately, this is what he's betting on right now, brute force. And of course, the protesters are insistent on making this revolution a peaceful revolution, and it's going to be a test of wills, basically, in the days to come, as peaceful demonstrators and peaceful protesters will be willing to sacrifice and sort of face the dangers of facing tanks and live ammunition and demand a change. This is the story that's going to be played out in the next few days.
What I'm curious, Syria was famously lumped in with George W. Bush's axis of evil, even if there was a change, if Bashar was chased out of office by a popular rebellion. Do you think Syria's position, relations with other countries in that region, with the West, would change with him?
the relationship will change drastically. In fact, I think the majority of the Syrian people have always craved better relationship with their neighbors. They never approved of the policies of sticking their noses in the neighbors' affairs and sort of fomenting trouble so that they can divert attention from their own internal strife. I think a democratic government in Syria will be busy rebuilding the country, and they will be sort of expecting very normalized relationship with all of their neighbors. And I think the bet, and of course, even if they are committed to the resistance ideology, I think resistance ideology in our part of the world is very popular. It's not going to go away, but there is a difference in style. There is a difference between using it as a way of distracting from internal problems, or being, in fact, loyal to it in the right way through dialogue, through diplomatic means, supporting the causes of liberation, because we have our own land that we need to liberate, of course, which is the Golan. But we will do all that peacefully, because in the final analysis, what we really want to do is build a better life for ourselves. We want to build our country, not risk war, not risk destruction. I think the mayhem is not what we want. This is a revolution about improving living conditions, about improving our livelihood, and about building a better future. And for this reason, our neighbors have nothing to worry about. Once this democratic process and democratic transition is established, Syria's position in the region will be that of an enabler of stability and security and freedom.
You've got high hopes for Syria. We'll see if those hopes actually take root. Ammar, thank you for talking to us tonight. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.